The Galactic Concord had seen wars before. They had endured empires rising and falling, fleets of 1,000 ships reduced to wreckage drifting through the dark, and countless races tested until only the strong endured. But even in that long history, Earth was an anomaly. Humans had not been invited into the Concord, they had crashed their way in, dragging sparks and broken treaties behind them. The Council had only reluctantly acknowledged humanity after Earth's crewed faster-than-light vessels tore open a wormhole lane by accident, scattering trade convoys and crippling one of the Concord's safest routes. To the elder species, humans were reckless, primitive, violent. To humanity, those were compliments. When the Klar Dominion stood before the Galactic Council and declared war upon Earth, the chamber erupted in scandalized murmurs. The Klar were not the largest empire, but they were ruthless, disciplined, and proud of their warrior traditions. They had risen on the backs of endless campaigns, carving their borders through centuries of conquest. They considered humans an insult to the very concept of war. Undisciplined, chaotic, under-equipped, and worst of all, laughing while they fought. The Klar's High Marshal raised his taloned hand before the council. His scaled skin gleamed beneath the artificial lights, and his voice was iron. Humans cannot be tolerated within the Concord. They lack restraint. They lack honor. They treat battle as entertainment. If these primates wish to play at war, then let them play against us. The Dominion declares war upon Earth. The chamber shook with outcry, and for the first time, humans had to stand before the galaxy and answer. Ambassador Elaine Navarro, sharp-eyed and sleepless, rose from her seat. She was no general, no soldier, but she had represented Earth since the Concord grudgingly accepted them 2 years prior. She knew exactly what the Klar expected: fear, pleas for peace, bargaining. Instead, Navarro adjusted her glasses, stared at the scaled High Marshal, and said, "War. With respect, Marshal, that's not war. That's training." The council went silent. The humans sitting in the delegation laughed. 3 weeks later, the Klar Dominion assembled a fleet the size of a small moon. Cruisers, carriers, dreadnoughts, thousands of hulls polished like blades in the void. The Dominion did not simply want to win. They wanted to humiliate Earth. But Earth had no armadas waiting. No fleet bases stretching across the stars. Their military was a patchwork, a handful of orbital stations, a scattering of frigates, and most of their soldiers still learning to adapt to zero-gravity deployments. The Concord declared neutrality, of course. Humanity had been warned. War with the Klar would be annihilation. To interfere would be to dishonor both combatants. And so, the galaxy gathered to watch the spectacle of Earth's inevitable destruction. They were still watching, confused, horrified, fascinated, when the first battle began. The Klar fleet found humanity's forward picket at the rim of Sol, a ragged line of old warships held together by spit, scrap, and sheer stubbornness. Most were refitted orbital defense craft, never meant for deep space engagements. Their weapons were outdated coil guns, short-range missiles, and rail cannons welded onto freighters. The Klar expected surrender or slaughter within minutes. Instead, humanity sent a single message across the void. It was video footage of humans in an Earth gym, running, lifting, sparring, sweating, laughing. A banner on the wall read, "No pain, no gain." The Klar did not understand. They advanced in rigid formation, ready to tear through the primitive line. The humans, however, did not meet them with formation. They broke apart, scattering like a shrapnel explosion. Each ship moved erratically, unpredictably, weaving through asteroid belts and slingshotting around orbital debris. The Dominion fleet fired in disciplined volleys. But volleys mean nothing when the enemy refuses to behave. A freighter modified into a gunboat spun on its axis, vented atmosphere through a breached corridor, and used the sudden jet of gas to torque itself around a Klar destroyer. The humans didn't fight like soldiers, they fought like brawlers. And brawlers didn't care about rules. Captain Darius Cole, commanding the human flagship Iron Will, grinned from his command chair as sparks showered the bridge. His crew held on with mag clamps, shouting and cursing, their laughter cutting through alarms. "Status," he barked. "Shields fried, railguns overheating, hull breach on Deck 7, reported his XO. Beautiful, Cole replied. Keep pressure on the bastards. The Klar did not realize it at first, but they were being herded. The chaotic, flailing attacks of the humans were not random, they were deliberately disorderly. Like a street fight, where feints and wild swings masked the real strike. One Dominion cruiser pursued a crippled human frigate into an asteroid cluster only to discover too late that the frigate had lured them into overlapping kill zones. Missiles fired not from warships, but from concealed launchers buried in rock. The cruiser vanished in a blossom of fire. The galaxy watching from afar saw it clearly. Humanity had not been trying to win. They had been training. Every hit they took was data. Every loss was a lesson. Every mistake was experience earned. To the Klar, battle was sacred. To humanity, it was a gym. By the time the Dominion withdrew from Sol's Rim, they had lost 12 ships. Humanity lost 23. But for the humans, it was a victory. Not because they survived. Because they learned. In war colleges back on Earth, cadets studied recordings of the battle with wide eyes and sharper grins. Veterans from old Earth conflicts, dismissed by the Concord as too feral for civilized warfare, now drilled recruits on the art of chaos. The Klar thought they had declared war. Humanity called it Training Day 1. The Klar Dominion had expected a short campaign. By their calculations, Earth's fleet should have been annihilated within a single engagement. That first clash at Sol's Rim had been intended as a warning strike, a show of dominance, crushing humanity before they even thought to resist. Instead, the Dominion retreated. For the first time in centuries, a Klar fleet had turned away without victory. The High Marshal raged. In his eyes, the humans' tactics were not just defiance, they were mockery. This is not war, he hissed in the Dominion War Council. His claws dug into the steel table, leaving grooves. They flail like hatchlings, and yet they dare to wound us. They make a game of combat. He swore before his generals, the next strike would end humanity utterly. Back on Earth, the opposite mood reigned. Military academies overflowed with recruits. Factories ran day and night, turning out missiles, rail slugs, and improvised warheads. But it was not fear that drove them. It was exhilaration. In training yards, instructors shouted across the roar of engines and the crack of weapons fire. New cadets were told what veterans already knew. This war was not a burden, it was an opportunity. Every battle was practice. Every loss was a lesson. Every death was fuel for the living. In a crowded hangar on Lunar Base, Sergeant Elena Varga slammed a combat drone into the deck plating, dusted her hands, and barked at the recruits watching. You think the Klar are unbeatable? You think their ships are too advanced? Then you're still thinking like them. Forget the manuals. Forget their rules. Out here, the only rule is this. She kicked the ruined drone, sending its shell skidding. Adapt faster than they do. That's how humans win. The recruits cheered, and in their eyes was something the Klar never understood, joy. The Dominion's second offensive came in force. A fleet of 500 warships cut into human space, striking at colonies and trade routes. The galaxy braced itself for the inevitable massacre. Yet what followed was not massacre, it was mayhem. At Vega Station, Dominion cruisers broke through orbital defenses and prepared to level the settlement below. But instead of soldiers in uniform, they found civilians launching a counterattack. Miners, engineers, freight pilots, armed not with advanced plasma rifles, but with cutting lasers, jury-rigged explosives, and mining drones retrofitted with rail spikes. The Dominion expected surrender. What they got was a riot. One Klar officer, later captured, testified before the Concord. They did not fight as soldiers. They fought as if every moment of battle was play. We disabled their weapons, and they threw themselves at us with bare hands. They screamed not in fear, but in excitement. They laughed as they died. I have never seen such creatures. By the third month, the Dominion realized their war was spiraling out of control. Every skirmish, every clash, humanity was improving. Ship designs shifted weekly as engineers tore apart wreckage and rebuilt on the fly. Weapons once thought crude now outmaneuvered precision-targeted fire. Tactics changed mid-battle, entire doctrines rewritten by survivors who shared their findings across the fleet in real time. It was like fighting an opponent in a sparring ring who got stronger every round. And humanity didn't hide it. They broadcast their battles. Not propaganda, not carefully edited footage, but raw feeds of soldiers screaming into helmets, ships colliding in suicidal rams, pilots singing and swearing as they pushed their crafts to breaking point. Billions watched across the galaxy. Billions learned the truth. To humans, this war was nothing less than a live-fire exercise. Captain Darius Cole of the Iron Will leaned over a tactical display as alarms blared. His ship was pinned against a Dominion carrier, shields flickering, hull plating half-melted. "Sir, we can't hold," his XO shouted. Cole just grinned. His teeth were bloody where the last impact had thrown him across the deck. "Of course we can't. That's the point." He slammed his fist down on the comms. "All hands, drill number 4. The order rippled through the ship. Crew scrambled, not with desperation, but with practiced rhythm. Compartments vented. Engines flared. The Iron Will rolled into the carrier's blind spot, hammered point-blank railfire into its engines, then careened away as half its own bulkheads tore open. The Dominion carrier broke apart. The Iron Will limped away, crippled but alive. On the bridge, Cole laughed through the pain. "Not bad," he wheezed. "Let's call that training complete. Now we know what doesn't work." His crew cheered, even as medics dragged the wounded off the deck. Across the galaxy, observers were shaken. The Concorde had gathered to watch Earth burn. Instead, they watched something horrifying, a species that grew sharper the longer they fought. The Vetari, an aquatic race that had once fought the Klar centuries before, whispered among themselves. "They don't fear war. They hunger for it. Every battle only makes them stronger." The Creel, insectoid traders who had dismissed humanity as savages, began sending quiet shipments of material support. Better to befriend predators than stand against them. And in the shadows, even the Concorde's greatest powers began to worry. If humanity survived this war, what would they become? By the end of the second offensive, the Klar Dominion had lost nearly 80 ships. Humanity had lost hundreds. Colonies were ash, fleets scattered, soldiers buried in vacuum. And yet, when the survivors returned to Earth, they were greeted not as the broken remnants of a doomed people, but as victors returning from a tournament. Earth's skies thundered with celebration. Recruitment lines stretched around city blocks. Children played Klar versus humans in the streets, laughing as they pretended to charge alien warriors. To the galaxy, it was madness. To humanity, it was motivation. For the first time, the Dominion realized they had not declared war on a species. They had signed up to be humanity's sparring partner. And humanity wasn't finished training yet. The Dominion's generals had never known fear. For centuries, the Klar had conquered with methodical efficiency. Their fleets moved like clockwork, their soldiers drilled into near-mechanical precision. Fear was for their enemies, not for them. But by the 6th month of the war, fear had crept in. Not of defeat. Of humiliation. The Dominion's fleets were still larger, stronger, and better armed. On paper, the humans should have been broken. Yet each engagement ended the same way, the humans blooded, battered, but alive and sharper than before. The Klar began to realize they were no longer facing the same opponent they had declared war upon. Humanity had changed. On Earth, entire industries had transformed. Civilian factories churned out not only weapons, but modular upgrades that could be bolted onto ships mid-battle. Engineers competed like athletes, racing to see who could design the fastest refit, the cleverest trap, the strangest weapon. War had become innovation. At Mars shipyards, a team of young engineers unveiled a prototype that made even hardened veterans whistle, the Grave Spike. A weapon designed not to destroy ships outright, but to cripple their maneuvering by slamming local gravity fields into sudden flux. It was unpredictable, unstable, and dangerous even to its users. The military brass balked. But the engineers smiled, shrugged, and answered the same way every human did when told something was too risky. Sounds like perfect training material. By the time of the Battle of Epsilon Eridani, humanity's style of combat had mutated beyond recognition. The Dominion arrived with a fleet of 200 ships, arrayed in perfect formation. Their weapons bristled, shields gleamed, and every move was calculated. The humans greeted them with what looked like chaos. Frigates darted in random arcs, carriers ejected drones by the hundreds, and missiles launched in wild spirals. Half the weapons seemed to misfire, detonating prematurely or sputtering into silence. The Klar commanders laughed. Then the trap closed. Every misfire had been deliberate. The detonations formed mines disguised as wreckage. The spiraling missiles redirected mid-flight, guided by new adaptive software. The swarms of drones weren't there to kill, they were there to confuse targeting systems, to overwhelm the Dominion's carefully synchronized strikes. And in the middle of the storm, the first gravespike fired. The Dominion's flagship suddenly lurched sideways, its artificial gravity tearing at its own bulkheads. Crew were flung into walls. Systems failed. Then the humans pounced, descending on the flagship like wolves on a wounded beast. By the time the Klar retreated, they had lost 50 ships. Humanity lost far more, but again, they called it a victory. Because every surviving crew, every limping vessel, had just completed another training module. Captain Darius Cole of the Iron Will staggered through the wreckage of his bridge after Epsilon Eridani. Smoke burned his lungs, and his left arm was bound in makeshift bandages. Half his ship was gone. But his grin never wavered. "Transmit the footage," he ordered, voice hoarse. "Let the whole damn galaxy see it." His XO hesitated. "Sir, if the Concorde sees what we're doing, they'll know the truth," Cole cut in. "And the truth is this, we're not losing. We're learning. And when the training's done," he leaned forward, eyes blazing through the haze, "we'll be unstoppable." The message went out, unfiltered. Raw combat footage, laughter amid screams, humans clapping each other on the back even as they bled. Billions across the galaxy watched. Some races cheered. Others trembled. The Klar seethed. Inside the Dominion, dissent began to grow. Soldiers whispered of human madness, of enemies who treated slaughter as sport. Some asked if this was truly war, or some nightmare they could never wake from. A Dominion admiral, frustrated beyond words, slammed his fist into a holotable during a strategy meeting. "They fight as if war is joy. How do you defeat those who crave the very thing that should break them?" No one had an answer. Meanwhile, Earth only doubled down. On Luna, a new doctrine was carved into the walls of the Academy: fight to fail. Fail to improve. Recruits were drilled to throw themselves into hopeless scenarios, to seek out failure as eagerly as they sought victory. If you survived, instructors told them, you passed the lesson. Entire fleets were sent into mock battles where commanders were forbidden to use conventional tactics. They had to invent, to improvise, to innovate under pressure or die trying. For humanity, defeat wasn't shame. It was curriculum. By the 9th month, the galaxy no longer called it the Klar-Human War. They called it the Training War. And the name stuck. The turning point came at Sirius. The Dominion launched their largest offensive yet, 1,000 ships, an overwhelming armada meant to end humanity in one crushing blow. They found humanity waiting. Not scattered. Not disorganized. Not clinging to desperation. But ready. Hundreds of human ships stood in loose formation, bristling with experimental weapons, hulls scarred from past battles. Above them, orbital stations crackled with jury-rigged defenses. Below them, civilian vessels stood armed to the teeth. The humans didn't broadcast a surrender. They broadcast music. Raucous, furious, alive. When the Dominion fleet advanced, the battle that followed was not chaos, it was controlled madness. Humanity had learned. Every lesson, every failure, every scar, they had forged it into doctrine. Ships dove into the fray like brawlers into a bar fight, but every strike had purpose. Drones swarmed in coordinated clouds, grave spikes hammered the Dominion's largest vessels, and suicide runs became surgical blows. For the first time, the Klar felt the tide turning against them. The humans weren't just training anymore. They were performing. When the smoke cleared at Sirius, both sides were crippled. Hundreds of ships were gone. The battlefield was a graveyard of twisted metal and drifting bodies. But humanity remained. Blooded, gasping, broken but grinning. And the Dominion's commanders, watching from the wreckage of their surviving fleet, finally understood. They had not declared war on a species. They had volunteered to be humanity's sparring partner. And the humans were only now beginning to warm up. The Dominion had never bled like this. Their fleets were fractured, their supply lines strangled, their soldiers shaken. And worst of all, their reputation, their aura of invincibility, had cracked. For centuries, the Claw had been feared as the apex predators of the galaxy. Now whispers spread across Concord space. The humans are learning. Every battle, they grow stronger. The Dominion is training its own executioner. The High Marshal knew it too. He sat alone in his war chamber, staring at the map of human space. He had expected Earth to burn within a month. Now, after nearly a year of grinding conflict, it was his Dominion on the defensive. If this continued, the Claw wouldn't just lose a war. They would lose their place atop the galaxy's food chain. And so, with the desperation of an empire cornered, the High Marshal gave one final order: all fleets to Earth. The galaxy held its breath. The largest armada in Claw history, nearly 2,000 warships, descended upon Sol. Every major Concord race tuned their sensors, eager to witness Earth's funeral. Yet beneath the anticipation there was unease. Because deep down, they all knew what the humans would call this battle. Graduation. Earth did not cower. The skies above the blue planet swarmed with fleets, patched, scarred, but proud. Orbiting stations bristled with weapons. Civilian freighters had been armored into gunships, orbital tugs welded with rail cannons. Even colony ships and old transports were armed, their crews eager for one last fight. At Lunar Base, banners flew, final exam. On Mars, troops painted their armor with slogans: Test Day, Pass or Die, Let's Get That A+. And on the flagship Iron Will, Captain Darius Cole stood before his weary, grinning crew. Today, he said, voice booming through the battered ship, we stop being students. Today, we show them what the training was for. The crew roared in reply. The Dominion armada swept into Sol like a storm. Battleships rained fire. Dreadnoughts pounded orbital defenses. Swarms of fighters poured across the void. The first line of human defense shattered instantly. That was the plan. Every mistake, every failure, every suicidal maneuver humanity had committed over the past year had been practice for this very moment. As the Dominion pressed forward, human fleets peeled back, not fleeing, but pulling the enemy deeper, stretching their formation, cutting them from supply ships. Orbital stations detonated in pre-planned self-destructs, scattering shrapnel fields into advancing cruisers. Civilian ships dove headlong into battleships, crippling their cannons in kamikaze strikes. It was not chaos. It was choreography. The galaxy had never seen such a thing, war as performance. At the battle's heart, the Iron Will plunged straight into the Dominion's command fleet. The High Marshal himself snarled from the bridge of his dreadnought. End this madness. Crush them. His officers obeyed, but nothing worked as it should. Targeting systems scrambled. Engines flared erratically. Gravity wells bent at impossible angles. The grave spikes fired in perfect sync, crippling the dreadnought's escorts. Human drones swarmed the hull like biting insects, detonating in precise patterns. Rail slugs slammed through shield after shield. On the Iron Will's bridge, alarms screamed, metal groaned, and fires burned unchecked. Captain Cole braced against the chaos, blood running down his temple. Push harder, he shouted. They're almost there. Sir, we're almost gone, his XO barked. Cole grinned through the smoke. Then it's a fair fight. The humans laughed even as their ship broke apart around them. The final clash was brutal. Thousands died in minutes. The void filled with wreckage and flame. Yet through it all, the humans kept coming wave after wave, each one fiercer than the last. When the Dominion flagship finally shuddered under the weight of its wounds, humanity struck the last blow not with some grand superweapon, but with a battered freighter that rammed its bridge head-on, detonating in a fireball that tore the dreadnought's heart out. The High Marshal's last sight was human faces grinning through cracked visors, hurling themselves at him like warriors at play. The battle ended in silence. The Dominion armada, what remained of it, broke and fled. Over Sol, wreckage drifted like stars. Thousands of human ships were gone. Cities burned. Families wept. And yet, humanity stood. Scarred, blooded, mourning but smiling. Because they had done it. The training was over. In the aftermath, the Concord convened. The galaxy expected Earth to sue for peace, to beg for mercy, to collapse from exhaustion. Instead, Ambassador Elaine Navarro stood before the assembly. Her voice was hoarse, her face gaunt, but her words carried across every channel. You thought we were reckless. You thought we were fragile. You thought we treated war like a game. You were wrong. War was our game. And you, she fixed her gaze on the surviving Dominion delegates, were our sparring partners. We thank you for the training. Now we're ready for the real thing. The chamber fell into stunned silence. And for the first time in galactic history, the Klar Dominion lowered their banners in defeat. Across the stars, the legend spread. That when aliens declared war, humanity didn't see enemies. They saw teachers. They saw practice. They saw a gym, a dojo, a proving ground. And when the war was over, humanity walked away stronger, sharper, deadlier than ever before. The galaxy learned a truth it would never forget. You don't declare war on humans. You sign up for their training program.